Global's newsroom for LBC. I'm Kev McGraw.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. It's 8 on LBC. Yes, I know I'm wearing a tie if you're watching. Very unusual. It's the first time in 2 years, but I've been to interview Michelle Barnier, as you will hear, at 9 o'clock on LBC. Our panel tonight, Chris Bryant, Labour MP for the Rhondda. Yeah, I know. I can't do it. Andrew Bowie is a Conservative MP for what is your constituency, Andrew? So I don't get it wrong.
West Aberdeenshire and Kincardine.
It's far too complicated. Rachel Cunliffe is not an MP. She works for the New Statesman. And Christopher Snowdon is not an MP either. He works for the Institute of Economic Affairs. They're here to answer your questions on 0345 6060 973. And of course, you can watch us on Global Player on the LBC website at lbc.co.uk and the LBC YouTube, Facebook and Twitter feeds.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
It's been such a busy news week this week, so many questions that you could ask, but of course we're going to start off with the big news of the day, and that is the Labour Party conference, Keir Starmer's speech. Noel in Gloucester has a question on this. Hello, Noel.
Hi, Iain.
Hi.
What it is in 2015, the Labour Party were politically and financially bankrupt under centre-right politics with Ed Miliband. Do they really think returning to that is going to get them in power? Because it doesn't matter what Boris Johnson does, they're behind in the polls. Surely that's a clue.
So you think that they should have carried on with the left-wing politics of Jeremy Corbyn?
No, I think they need to be centre-left, not hard-left, but to return into Blairite politics...
Well, Ed Miliband would say he was centre-left.
No, it wasn't. It's
Okay.
centre-right. It's returning to the centre-right. It's Thatcherism light. People just don't want it.
Noel, I can assure you it isn't. Chris Bryan, do you get fed up with these factional definitions about what's centre-left and what's centre-right?
I'm just delighted I've got my party back. That's what it felt like this week. And I enjoyed being at party conference this time. I think when we were really bankrupt was in 2019 when we, lost worst election results since 1935, I think, for us. Losing seats that we should never even be thinking of losing, and losing against Boris Johnson. And I thought Keir Starmer made a really good point this morning about, if we think he's bad, how come we lost to him? I mean, there really is something that we've got to learn out of all of that. And I thought, I just feel that now it's like the grown-ups are back in the room. And I think that's a really important moment.
Andrew Bowie, you're Deputy Chairman of the Conservative Party. I think you are still, aren't you, after the reshuffle, or am I out of date on that?
Vice Chairman, Iain.
Vice Chairman.
Yeah.
Chairman for Vice. Now, the tempting thing here for you to do is to sort of come out with a whole load of party political arguments against Keir Starmer and say it was a bit of a letdown and all the rest of it. Was there anything that you heard today that you thought, actually, this man might be a more fearsome opponent than we had first thought?
Absolutely not. I listened to 60 minutes of the 90 that Keir spoke for today, and it's interesting that Noel says that Keir is driving the Labour Party to the centre-right. I, frankly, and I think most people out there, haven't got a clue what the Labour Party stand for at the minute. They spent 4 or 5 days in Brighton bickering amongst themselves, not speaking to the general public. So we are, even more in the dark now than we were before the Labour Party conference started as to what Labour's plan for the NHS or the situation with the HGV driver shortage or anything else might be. And if this was supposed to be Keir's big moment, this was supposed to be the day that the sensibles in the Labour Party took the Labour Party back. But for all that he said, he lacked the passion of Kinnock, he lacked the empathy of Blair, and he lacked the gravitas of Brown, and it was just boring.
Andrew, you prepared this all last week. Andrew, all of that you prepared last week. You knew you were going to say that, whatever happened.
Good line, though, wasn't it? Good line.
Oh no, it's pathetic. It's childish, Andrew, and you're better than that.
Hey, Chris, it's not childish. It's true. You spent
It
4
is.
days,
It's
4 or
not
5 days
true.
bickering. You said the
It's not true.
the adults are,
We didn't bicker actually very much. It was remarkably unbickery.
Chris, you said the grown-up. You had a shadow cabinet member resign in the middle of your party conference. You can't say that wasn't bickering.
What was his job, Andrew? Andrew, what was his job?
Well, I've lost track. Given how many shadow
exactly.
cabinet members there have been.
I think you've
over
just
the
said
past
how
4
important that
years
moment
I've
was.
been in Parliament, Chris.
Do you know
I'm
what
glad
his
that
job
you-
was?
I do know what his job was, and it's not a job which exists in the cabinet.
No, indeed.
So,
Although quite a few of
we had a
those.
really, really good week.
Chris,
We had,
Chris, neither does
look,
Angela
Andrew, we
Rayner's
had.
job exist in the cabinet. Are you
Sorry, I
saying that she
didn't
could
hear
just
what you
walk
said.
away? I said neither does Angela Rayner's job exist in the cabinet. Are you saying that you'd be happy with her walking away and leaving?
We have a deputy leadership which we elect in our Labour Party, whereas in your case, the deputy leader of the government basically stamps his foot enough in Downing Street, and Boris Johnson has to cave in. That's how Dominic Raab, I think, got the position, wasn't it?
I couldn't possibly comment.
You know perfectly well that's what happened. But the serious point here is, look, I don't think we've been an adequate opposition. We weren't under Jeremy Corbyn. We were a party that had drifted a long way away from voters in my seat in the Rhondda. We had a big victory this May, taking a seat off Plaid Cymru in the Rhondda, but we had to prove this week that the Labour Party is back in business, interested in business, making sure that small businesses have an opportunity to thrive, a party of law and order, because crime in the end is an injustice to the poor, and a party of hard work. I thought that was a very strong message from Keir.
I mean, Andrew, you said you watched 60 of the 90 minutes. Did you hear the passage on law and order and crime? Because I would have thought there was very little in that, apart from a bit of bashing of the government, that you could disagree with. Isn't it a good thing that the Labour Party is talking in that way from your point of view?
Yeah, it's about time that the Labour Party started engaging on the serious issues of the day. I've been in Parliament for 4.5 years, and goodness me, we've been waiting a long time for the opposition actually to turn up. So I welcome the fact that Labour are going to start engaging on serious issues. But as I said, I mean, in those 60 minutes today, and indeed over the past 5 days, we still had no actual evidence that the Labour Party have any answers to the biggest issues that we're facing today. And if they are a credible party of opposition, if they are a government in waiting, which they profess to be, then they better start coming up with some answers to some of the problems that we as a country are facing.
Just take one issue then, Andrew. Explain to me why it is that 95% of domestic violence cases and rape cases don't go to prosecution under your government. Why is that?
Look, we're aware that we need to do more on prosecution of rape cases. It's an abominable situation.
Why is hate crime rising?
Well, we're not going to go through every single policy.
No, but he wants us to talk about policies, serious policies.
I
I'm
know,
happy to do
and we
that.
will get questions on some of these issues.
I can give you answers on what we're doing to combat the rise in hate crime, including recruiting 20,000 more police officers. But
Once you cut 20,000 police officers, you nana.
Okay. Let's bring in our two non-politicians to calm things down a little bit, possibly. What do you think, Rachel? First of all, in answer to Noel's question, and this is a meat and drink for the New Statesman, isn't it? Sort of defining where the Labour Party should be on the centre-left spectrum. But to the rest of the country, they just want sensible policies, don't they? They don't really care about left and right.
Well, I don't think I've ever been brought in to calm anything down before. This is definitely new. On where Labour is, the fact is, if they were centre-left or moderate-left or Blairite under Ed Miliband, they then had a very left-wing leader. They lost 2 elections, one of which was absolutely disastrous. So if they're moving back into more electable territory, then that's something that anyone to the right of Boris Johnson's Conservatives should be endorsing. From an ideological perspective, they have to be able to convince voters. It's not enough to say, we think we're right, we won the argument, now you should all agree with us. It has to be what Blair was actually very successful at doing, which is saying, these are the voters we need to win, how can we go out and convince them, which is actually what Boris Johnson did in the last election with the Red Wall. And up until this point...
There's nothing wrong with the Labour Party trying to pitch to a middle-class woman in Worcestershire, is there? Talking of Jackie Smith. But I mean, that's been the problem, where there has been as I see it, there's been a failure to recognise that successful political parties are coalitions, and they attract a wide range of interests from of people, and it's not just the working class, it's not just a particular sector of society, and if you just go for your core vote, you're never going to win.
And if you just go for ideological purity, which is if you disagree with the most extreme, the most far left-wing voices on anything from the minimum wage through to social issues, through to nationalising companies, if you disagree on any of those points, that you are therefore a Tory and we don't have to worry about you and basically shame on you, you're a bad person, you might feel ideologically pure, but you're not going to convince anyone in the next election. So if we have a Labour Party now that is more outward looking and is actually interested in having conversations with people who don't normally vote Labour or who haven't voted Labour in the last few elections, I would say that's more likely to be successcul.
Christopher?
Well, I think the idea that Starmer is dragging the party to the centre-right is ridiculous. Starmer may be, perhaps, in the context of the Labour membership, on the centre-right. He's certainly not on the centre-right in terms of the country. He's not some Blair figure who is trying to cast out the militants. I think
that's exactly what this week was all about.
Well, that's the portrayal of it, but I mean, he's nowhere near to the right of Blair. He is absolutely trying to cast out some of the very hardcore far left people in the Labour Party, and that is in itself a very big challenge. But Gordon Brown was to the left of Tony Blair, Ed Miliband was to the left of Gordon Brown, and Jeremy Corbyn was way to the left of him. So I think, bearing in mind that Ed Miliband was rejected by the party, by the country in 2015, his redhead and all this kind of stuff, whether fairly or unfairly, he was too left-wing for the UK electorate, or at least the English electorate. I'm not convinced that Starmer is to the right of Ed Miliband by any means. So I think Ed Miliband has two problems, and both of which have shown themselves over the course of this conference. One is he needs to...
Keir Starmer has two problems.
Sorry, who did I say?
Ed Miliband.
Keir Starmer has two problems.
Back to the Future.
Keir Starmer has two problems, which are not dissimilar to Ed Miliband's, I guess. Keir Starmer has two problems. One, he needs to do what Kinnock did in the 1980s with the Labour Party in terms of getting rid of the militant far left people. But also he has this problem with what I will lazily describe as the woke. And they have kind of dominated a lot of the media coverage about the Labour conference, insofar as I haven't seen much of the Labour conference. I'm afraid I have other things to do. But a lot of it has been about whether men have cervixes. And this question to Emily Thornberry and to Keir Starmer keeps cropping up, and of course they've had to go along with the idea that they do. I think this is an idea that the majority of people, particularly in the Red Wall, consider to be absurd. And I think he's got a big enough job on his hands trying to get rid of the kind of economic far left militants without having to deal with the woke militants. And those two things combined, I think, make his job very, very difficult at the next election, if he indeed survives to fight it, which I suspect he probably won't. I think they'll probably bring somebody in even further to the left.
Okay.
Nonsense. Utter drivel. Utter drivel.
Go on,
Why?
After this week, there is no prospect of the Labour Party changing its leader before the next general election. Keir had an immensely warm... I mean, I know there were some heckles in the room. Actually, I think they helped him.
They did help him.
It gave a bit more fire to him, and it
Quite
showed...
extraordinary, though, for someone to boo their party leader or heckle their party leader.
Oh, no, I mean, half the party conferences I've been to, I've seen it happen.
Theresa May got handed a P45 at hers.
Yeah.
Not by a
her own
party member.
supporters.
Not by a party member.
Well, I don't think some of the people who were heckling today were probably party members
What
either.
were they doing then?
Quite. A very good question. But the point was, I think it made the single thing that we had to prove this week is that Labour is back in business, and that the party is no longer run by Jeremy Corbyn. And I can tell you that voters in the Red Wall, because I live in the Red Wall, the bit that is still Labour in the Rhondda, voters in the Rhondda were really troubled by Jeremy Corbyn, not least on things like foreign affairs. I think one of the moments that was really difficult for us was when Jeremy Corbyn took the wrong view on Russia. It was just an extraordinary moment. I remember Andrew Bowie actually was sitting behind Theresa May in the chamber at the time, and it was just one of those, you hang on, It's like you don't believe in Britain, Jeremy. And so I think it's been really important that the Labour Party has changed. Keir is in an immensely stronger position than he was a week ago or 4 weeks ago.
We do have one more question on this subject, but we'll leave that till after the break. It's 8:17.
LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
20 past 8 on LBC. You're listening to Cross Question or watching Cross Question with Chris Bryant, Andrew Bowie, Rachel Cunliffe and Christopher Snowdon. Claire is in Westminster. Hello, Claire.
Good evening. Firstly, an absolutely phenomenal speech. And I was particularly happy with regard to the mental health hubs that are coming down the line as an NHS worker. And I was very moved by the relaying of the heartbreaking story of the Cloughs who lost their daughter Jane. And of course, we still all bleed with Baroness Lawrence, the loss of Stephen. So I thought it was wonderful. It was a wonderful speech. And in the NHS, we were all cheering him because I was working today. But does the panel agree with me that there can never really be any peace and tranquility in the Labour Party until Jeremy Corbyn has the whip restored, as his constituents want? And one of the consultant paediatricians is actually one of his constituents, and he's not voting unless he can vote for Jeremy Corbyn. I know he can vote for him as an independent, but he wants to vote for him as a Labour MP. And also that Ken Loach, one of our foremost campaigning film directors, is unexpelled and invited back into the Labour Party.
Well, even though he's made blatantly anti-Semitic remarks, you want someone like that back in the Labour Party, do you, Claire?
Well, I wasn't aware that he'd made anti-Semitic remarks.
Why do you think he was expelled?
Well, I wasn't aware. I thought it was just because he opposed the very left-leaning policies of Keir Starmer. I wasn't aware that, because, I mean, how can somebody who can make films like I, Daniel Blake, be genuinely anti-Semitic? I suspect that's a smear, but I will stand corrected if I'm wrong.
When you finish listening to the programme tonight, I'd suggest you use Google and you can make up your own mind, but believe me, I haven't made that up. Rachel Cunliffe, this is meat and drink to the New Statesman, this kind of question, isn't it?
Well, also, I am a constituent of Jeremy Corbyn. I'm in Islington North. I'm also a Jewish constituent of Jeremy Corbyn in Islington North, and I haven't been particularly a Keir Starmer fangirl over the last year or so, but one of the things that he really has been successful at is getting a handle on the anti-Semitism problem within Labour and showing that he is serious about tackling it from the top. And that included expelling Jeremy Corbyn as a Labour MP as a sign to the Jewish community that he was serious about tackling that problem. Jeremy Corbyn had the opportunity to accept the findings of a report that showed the anti-Semitism problem within the party while he was party leader. He didn't accept the findings, he didn't apologise, and as a result of that, he was suspended. And for anyone Jewish who is interested or would like to be able to vote Labour at any point in the future, that was the first step in cleansing the party of its anti-Semitic image.
Andrew Barry, I imagine you'd quite like Jeremy Corbyn and Ken Loach to be readmitted to the Conservative Party. Sorry, to the Labour Party. That would be a story, wouldn't it?
That certainly would be. That would be something.
You can tell I'm tired after 4 days at a conference.
Iain, actually, on the contrary, I actually applaud Keir for taking the stand that you did in expelling Ken Loach and Jeremy Corbyn. There is no place for anti-Semitism in public life in the United Kingdom. Xenophobia, racism of any kind has no place in public life, and therefore I applaud what Keir Starmer did. But this does go to the heart of the big challenge that Keir has. A huge swathe of Labour Party members, and indeed people that voted for the Labour Party, particularly in 2017, and even more so, the young people in this country who voted for the Labour Party then, did so and joined the Labour Party because of Jeremy Corbyn. And he's got a huge challenge on his hands. How does he keep those members and keep that tent up? How does he keep these people together within the Labour Party? And how does he hold on to those voters who came to the Labour Party for the first time in 2017? It's obviously not a problem I'm going to spend too many sleepless nights worrying over, but it is a challenge that Keir Starmer faces, and it's probably his biggest challenge in terms of what he's trying to do. If he really wants to bring the Labour Party back as a serious party of opposition.
I'm going to ask Christopher and Chris to be quite brief in their answers because I want to squeeze in Brian in Glasgow with a related question as well. Christopher?
Yeah, well, I basically agree with what Rachel's already said. They were suspended with, I assume, good reason on the grounds of anti-Semitism. I really don't think that letting them back in the Labour Party is going to win them any votes in any constituency that counts.
Chris?
You can like Ken Loach's films and not like his anti-Semitism, and that's why I think.
So you will confirm what I said was correct.
Completely. Yeah, you know, I mean, I wasn't involved in the decision, but
you probably know more about it than I do.
Sometimes I know something. Anyway, but also in relation to Jeremy, look, it's a very simple thing. Jeremy, if Jeremy apologises properly, then he can come back into the Labour Party. But he's got to face up to the fact that in his time, on his watch, anti-Semitism became a vile part of the Labour Party, and I was so pleased that Louise Ellman has felt able, who was a Jewish Labour MP, who effectively felt hounded out of the Labour Party, has now felt able to join the Labour Party again. And it's, you know, I know that some people might say, well, look, the Labour Party's done a bit of talking about itself for the last week, but actually we needed to get our house in order to be able to put ourselves to the British public and be able to have a plan.
Claire, thank you. Let's go to Brian in Glasgow. Brian, what's your question, please?
Yes, I'd like to ask Chris Bryant, excuse me. Yeah, I was listening to the speech today, and with the current situation where there's only one Scottish Labour MP and the Scottish Labour Party are third in the Scottish Parliament and running fourth in the polls, what exactly are you going to do in Scotland to try and win back the Labour voters that voted for the SNP? Because Keir Starmer said nothing in the speech that I heard.
Leslie has sent in a tweet on this. He says Labour still hasn't addressed how it's going to get Scottish voters to vote Labour, which without Scottish votes, Labour will never win a general election. That is very true, isn't it?
It's not necessarily true, but because nothing's inevitable in politics. But obviously we've got to win over voters in Scotland, just as we've got to win them over in Wales. And, I know more about Wales than I do about Scotland. I think if you look at the way that Mark Drakeford handled the COVID crisis, the kind of political leadership that he's provided, which is serious, it's measured, it's not all bangs and whistles, but I think a lot of people place a deal of confidence in that. Anna Sawa, I think, has made a really important start. I would like to hear a bit more. Sometimes I think Nicola Sturgeon is given a really easy time by the media.
Agreed.
Because most Westminster journalists never actually read into the record in Scotland. And I think there should be a lot more analysis of the SNP's record.
And if they do, they're then assailed on Twitter by the cybernats generally.
Cybernats are a problem. They're worse than gnats in biting you.
Well, let's go to someone who knows more about Scotland than Wales, Andrew Bowie. Obviously, you don't want Labour to gain more seats in Scotland, but what is your analysis of the psephological situation in Scotland? Do you think that it is possible for Labour to win a majority without increasing their Scottish seats?
No, I don't think it is, and I think they're a long way off from achieving any victory in Scotland of any kind. It is quite incredible when you think back. We talked about Gordon Brown and Ed Miliband earlier on. In 2010, Labour returned the same number of MPs in Scotland as they had in 2005. There was no change in Scotland. Upwards of 40 seats were held by the Labour Party. In 2015, they were down to 1, and despite a brief blip in 2017, they have remained at 1 ever since. They are now third in the parliament that they helped to create in Holyrood, quite far behind the Scottish Conservative Party. And if you told me that 10 years ago when I first got into politics, I would have thought you were going round the bend. So the Labour Party are nowhere to be seen on any of the key issues of Scotland. In fact, the only party that are holding the SNP to account up here are, in fact, the Scottish Conservative Party. And it's just like the story across the rest of the UK. The Labour Party simply have no answers to the big questions that are facing us up here in Scotland, but yes, across the rest of the United Kingdom.
That's being a little bit churlish, isn't it? Because, I mean, OK, you are a political opponent of Anna Sarwar, but from my position in London, which you may say, well, you know nothing about it, but I think he's made quite an impressive start as Labour leader in Scotland. And let's face it, they've had quite a lot of them over the last few years.
He has. I mean, let's face it, Iain, there was quite a low bar set by his predecessors before he got in there.
Well, I would say he's had a more impressive start than your new leader in Scotland, I would say.
I would disagree. Douglas Ross has a great start as leader of the Scottish Conservatives, delivering our highest ever vote in an election, in a devolved election, returning the same number of MSPs as we had returned under Ruth Davidson in 2016, and taking the fight to Nicola Sturgeon on a daily basis in the Scottish Parliament. I actually think that we're doing very well under Douglas, and look forward to working under him as leader for many years to come.
Brief answers from Christopher and then Rachel. I've got an interesting tweet here. Somebody's saying, this is Alan, I think, even if Labour had won all 59 Scottish seats, the Tories would still have an 80-seat majority. That is true, isn't it?
Indeed. Not an 80-seat majority, I don't think.
Yeah, no, I think it would be.
Well,
no,
they've got an 80-seat majority now.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, because we'd have been taking them off the Scottish Nationalists.
Christopher.
Yeah.
Well, the Labour Party is in a very difficult position throughout the UK, really, but particularly in Scotland, and that's because a very, very large minority of people in Scotland want to secede. They want independence, and it seems as if they will continue voting for the SNP until at least another referendum happens, if not until independence happens. So I don't really see any solution for the Labour Party at all. I don't really like the way the SNP is governing in a lot of ways. I'm concerned about its authoritarianism and illiberalism. I don't like its policies on free speech and minimum pricing for alcohol and various other things. But so long as people want independence, they will continue voting for the SNP, almost as a protest vote. So, I mean, I guess the answer to the question, how can Labour do better, is, well, let Scotland be independent. I wouldn't personally vote for it myself if I was in Scotland, but I think it would be only after they become independent that the people in Scotland would decide who really they want to govern them.
Chris makes an interesting point there about the issues that he has with the Scottish National Party government, and unfortunately, on all of those issues, the Labour Party have lined up and voted alongside the Scottish National Party. They aren't offering any opposition on these key issues, which people are debating.
Okay, we're slightly running out of time here, Andrew. Rachel.
All I was going to say is that Chris is right in that the SNP record isn't given the focus in the media that it deserves, although we at the New Statesman are trying to counter that. We ran a piece by Ruth Davidson recently outlining how the SNP is very pro-independence, and Christopher's right. That's why Scottish people are supporting them, despite the record on healthcare, on education, on drug deaths, on crime, despite the fact that they're now in a coalition with the Scottish Greens, who have some quite eccentric policies, shall we say. But all that seems to matter to a core part of the Scottish electorate is, will they get a referendum? And they're happy to ignore a lot of that. And unfortunately, I'm not really sure what Labour can do about that.
I think part of the big problem, it's not necessarily the Westminster media that's a problem here, it's the Scottish media who seem to be enthralled to the SNP.
St Nicola.
Indeed.
Completely.
We'll agree on that. We may come back to that on another occasion. Right, we'll come to another of your questions in just a moment. We would like some more questions on non-Labour Party issues, if you can. 0345 6060 973. It's 8:33. Let's get the latest news headlines with Kevin McGrath.
The family of Sarah Everard have been describing her torment following a murder. Former police officer 48-year-old Wayne Cousins is being sentenced at the Old Bailey. The court heard how he pretended to arrest her before kidnapping her. Another 3 energy firms have gone bust, leaving more than 230,000 customers in need of a new supplier. Enstroga, Igloo and Symbio, the latest to go under thanks to rocketing wholesale gas prices. Customers will now be transferred to an alternative firm by Ofgem. And the fuel industry insists things are starting to get better at petrol stations and stocks will continue to stabilise. Meanwhile, the government's mobilised a fleet of tankers to help with the crisis. They're being driven by civilians rather than the army. LBC weather, blustery rain spreading eastwards overnight, lows of 5. Into Wednesday, outbreaks of heavy rain moving in from the west. The best chance of sunshine in the northeast, highs of 17 degrees.
LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
8:37, we have Labour MP Chris Bryant with us, Conservative MP Andrew Bowie, Rachel Cunliffe from the New Statesman and Christopher Snowdon from the Institute of Economic Affairs. A text question next from Mary in Bristol. What does the Sarah Everard case say about how far we have to come as a country in tackling violence against women? And of course, we've got the Sabina Nessa terrible tragedy as well that people are concerned about now. Rachel, as the only woman on the panel, I'm going to come to you first, because I think that listening to my colleague Matthew Thompson reporting from the court today on particularly Sarah's mother's letter to the court, I mean, it's just heartbreaking stuff. And sometimes you say, well, yes, but these things are very rare, particularly the horrible nature of this particular case. But it does make, I mean, particularly I think in big urban centres, particularly in London, a lot of women just do not feel safe. And it's very difficult to have a trite answer to say what can immediately be done to make them feel safer.
I think the point about this case, and it was heartbreaking, and I cried reading that statement, and I would advise anyone who is uncertain about the way a lot of women are feeling at the moment just to go read that statement and see if they can get through it without breaking down. But you say it's rare, and it's true. It is rare for a woman to be abducted off the street by a stranger. It's exceptionally rare for a woman to be abducted by a serving police officer, and for him to use his status as a police officer as a means to kidnap her, which is one of the reasons this particular case is so horrific. But it is not rare for women to face harassment, sexual violence, rape, assault, to feel unsafe walking in their local areas. It is not rare at all for women to have that sense of fear, and a sense of fear that is grounded in reality and grounded in lived experience. And if you have had to come off Twitter today just because of the other women sharing their stories about what has happened to them, and it's not as dramatic and it's not as horrific, and thankfully the ones who are sharing their stories are still alive, but the level of violence and fear that women face is on a scale that I think is very difficult for people who don't experience it to understand, and is also very difficult for us to accept on a day-to-day basis. And so when you get cases like this, that feeling of feeling unsafe, well, what is it that anyone can do? The police who are meant to help me clearly, in this case, the show won't be there. What do we need? How can anyone help us? What can anyone do? It's despair, and it's despair and it's anger and it's rage, and that is what we've been feeling today. And what's really sad about this is that in a few days' time, the conversation will have moved on, and we'll be talking about energy prices, or we'll be talking about COVID, important topics, but we will forget that this is the experience of millions of women in this country, and that very little is being done about it.
Andrew Bowie.
Yeah, I mean, I agree very much with what's been said already. I heard the report that you were speaking about, Iain, on LBC earlier on today, and I challenge anyone not to be close to tears listening to that letter and listening to the report of what Sarah endured in the last hours of her life. And, you know, it's all very well and good for politicians like myself to make glib comments like nobody in this country should feel unsafe walking alone at night, when quite plainly so many women and girls in this country do. And that's why it's one of the government's top priorities, combating violence against women and girls. That's why we've launched our strategy. We put £30 million into combating violence against women and girls. We've increased funding for a 24/7 rape and assault helpline. We passed the domestic.
Sorry, it takes years. It takes years for rape trials to even come to court. Actual years, and those are the very small percentage that actually do. And under the Conservative government, funding for the court system for trials to be able to take place has been cut, I think, by half. So rape victims who are brave enough to go to the police and who have the police actually listen to them, which really isn't the case very often, then have to wait years to see if their case is going to be taken forward, in which time the men who raped and assaulted them are free to go and behave in the same way towards other women. Many of the women who are incredibly brave in telling their stories drop out of the legal system, of the court system, because the process is too traumatic, because the Conservative government has cut the necessary funding needed in order to have a functioning justice system.
Yeah, and that's unacceptable. It's completely unacceptable that so few cases actually make their way to court. And we recognise there are huge issues with the abominable levels that we have right now. Actually,
but Andrew, you voted for these policies. You voted for these things. You voted for the cuts of 20,000 police officers. You're recruiting again now, but we're still 8,000 down. You voted for the closures of the courts. We now have the slowest process of getting to a court
I don't think I voted
trial
for any
that we've ever had in our history. And on top of that, you've got Rob Roberts sitting as a Conservative member of Parliament, a man who was found to have been making inappropriate advances to a member of staff. As I recall it, when you were PPS to Theresa May, you allowed Charlie Elphicke to come back into the Conservative Party just to vote for Theresa May to stay as Conservative leader. I'm sorry, this is just arrant hypocrisy.
Well, I'm not going to get drawn into comments on individual cases about individual members of Parliament. What I would say is that we're addressing...
Should Rob Roberts still be in Parliament?
I've said on public record before, on television, that no, I think he should do the decent thing and resign for the good of his constituents more than anything else. I think they deserve a respectful and honourable member of Parliament acting on their behalf. But that's a completely different issue to the situation facing so many women and girls in the country.
What's not a different issue is the fact that Boris Johnson's response to when the Sarah Everard news first broke in March was to say to help women feel safer. His policy, his grand policy idea, was that he was going to put more undercover police officers in nightclubs to help women feel safe. That was the idea. I can't even I can't even express how insulting that is, that the Prime Minister thinks that forget funding to rape crisis centres, forget funding to courts and judges so that cases can...
And legal aid.
And to legal aid and proper training for police so they understand what cases of sexual violence. No, we'll put more police in nightclubs and that will help women feel safer.
That's just one of many, many steps that we're taking. And I'm not going to pretend that women out there don't... Yeah, sorry.
Andrew, I want to hear from Christopher on this. I'm just going to read a tweet out that Jeremy Vine put out earlier. He said, as a father of 2 teenage girls, I have absolutely no idea how to impress on them that a policeman who stops them may be doing so on false pretences, may handcuff them unlawfully, may murder them for his own satisfaction. What do I say to help keep them safe? Avoid the police. Now, a very lurid way of putting it, maybe, but what do parents say to their teenage girls, daughters, in circumstances like this, when, OK, this is one policeman, and you can't say that one policeman represents all the police. But if you can't trust the police to keep you safe, who can you trust?
Well, indeed. But I think this shows that, what lessons indeed can you learn from this horrible but extraordinary event? I'm not sure it lends itself to any particular policy conclusion. I would certainly agree on the broader point that we need to have more money to get rid of the judicial backlog, and there's far too many people waiting to be tried, and perhaps we need more prison space. But I really don't think that this particular murder tells us anything about what policy should be. If we look back on it, knowing all the details that we do, what would we do if we could turn back the clock? It's not obvious to me that we could do anything. Sometimes just horrible things happen.
He could have been held accountable for 2 counts of indecent exposure while he was a serving police officer, and then he wouldn't have been in a position to arrest/kidnap Sarah Everard in the first place.
Or we could have much tougher sentences on people who are guilty of indecent exposure. I'd be completely in favour of that.
I'm not sure that really meets the issue. You've got to be able to have a reliable system so that every single woman is taken seriously when they bring an issue forward. You've got to have early warning systems in every single police station. You've got to have more police officers simply to be able to deal with the numbers of cases. I say as an MP, I think I've been an MP for 20 years. I think nearly every murder in my constituency has been of a woman by her partner, and sometimes with a child killed as well. And that is just the peak, as it were, of an enormous problem of domestic violence. And it feels as if the government has absolutely no plan whatsoever.
Chris, I'm sorry, Chris, you're being disingenuous there. You know that we're taking action here. Yes, we could do more.
You're not doing any of the things that need to be done.
Of course, we recognise the very troubling increase in domestic abuse over the past year and a half as a result of the lockdown. That's why we passed the Domestic Abuse Act.
It's COVID's fault.
The definition. No, Chris, that's not what I said. I was talking about the Domestic Abuse Act, on the bill committee of which I sat, and on which there was a cross-party consensus that we were doing the right thing, broadening the definition of domestic abuse, dealing with online sexual abuse, and doing much more to support the women that are being targeted in this country.
But if what you've done for 11 years... If what you've done for 11 years is slash every part of the criminal justice system so that women simply don't get a fair hearing when they present themselves to the police and it comes to the Crown Prosecution Service, all of that is a waste of energy. You've got to deal with the fact that the criminal justice system is broken in relation to women today.
Okay, I'm going to draw this one to a close. Thank you all very much indeed. We've got another question coming up on the minimum wage. It's 8:48.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7. Listen on your radio and on Global Player.
There were some undoubted highs.
Under my leadership, the fight against crime will always be a Labour issue. A Labour issue.
But a few ugly lows too.
So, you see...
So, should it be judged as a Starmer Stormer or, oh dear, Sir Keir? Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer joins me tomorrow to discuss.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast.
With the British Airways American Express Accelerating Business Card. Check out the world.
LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
8:52. Chris Bryant, Andrew Bowie, Rachel Cunliffe and Christopher Snowdon with me to answer your questions. Right, Harry is in Bury St Edmunds, a town I know very well. Hello, Harry.
Good evening, Ian. I hope you're well. It's been a while since I've spoken to you. My question is on the announcement made yesterday on the minimum wage being voted, if Labour go into government, to be raised to £15 an hour. I don't see that being reasonably plausible for many small businesses that you have round in the east and the middle of the country, which have, at the moment, especially East Anglia, which has one constituency seat voting Labour, which happens to be the university seat. I think if that wasn't there, it would be a complete Conservative area. So I can't see that making firms pay £15 an hour is plausible. And if you do that, a lot of employees are going to lose their bonuses they get for working with companies because firms can't justify that cost. And I'm curious what the panel thinks, if that's correct or incorrect.
Christopher Snowdon.
Thank you. It's great to have a question about economics at the end there. Yes, you're obviously quite right. It doesn't work. And you mentioned the regional differences, which are actually very important in this respect. Places like central London would be much better equipped to afford these kind of wage costs as opposed to someone like Northern Ireland, for example. I mean, the reality of it is that, well, let's think it through. What happens if you have to pay your staff a lot more money? It'd be £30 million. 30 million people would get a pay rise as a result of this minimum wage hike if they were still employed by the end of it. How would the employers pay for it? Well, they'd have to put up prices. We're already staring down the barrel of a major inflation problem.
But wasn't this the argument when the minimum wage was actually introduced?
It was indeed, yeah, it was indeed. And I think there's a question of a kind of tipping point with this. I mean, for a long time, the Conservative Party opposed having any kind of minimum wage on the basis that it would increase unemployment. If it did increase unemployment, it was probably fairly marginal. When George Osborne introduced what he called the living wage, the Office for Budget Responsibility actually said it would increase unemployment by 60,000 people. But although that's a lot of people, it kind of fades into the noise when you look at the overall unemployment figure. So perhaps it did, perhaps it didn't. We don't know. What is undeniable is if you increase it very significantly and very sharply, you will see a rise in unemployment. And that can take many different forms. It could be a pub or restaurant, for example, that has to put its prices up so much that nobody goes to it anymore. Or it could be McDonald's that replaces their staff with machines. And we've seen a lot of that over the years. I mean, if we could just generate higher wages by increasing the minimum wage, let's increase it to £40 or £50 or £60. I think there comes a point at which anybody can see that you're going to make businesses go bust and lead to unemployment. So the question is, at what point do you get to that? And I think when you're dealing with 13 million employees, most people, hopefully, I hope, can recognise that that's going to lead to unemployment. And it's not me being a heartless capitalist by any means. I want people to earn more money, but I don't want people to be unemployed, and there has to be a kind of balance to that.
Chris Bryant, this £15 an hour, I have to say, I'd never heard it come up before. It seemed to be a very new invention, and Andy MacDonald resigned over it. And I'm thinking, yeah, but he'd agreed a policy that was £10 an hour. So where has this come from?
I don't know, to be honest. I was completely flummoxed by it myself. I think £15 an hour is more than the median wage. And if that's true, then, I mean, £15 would be a very dramatic change.
Are you sure it's not from $15 in the US and they've just got confused about the currency?
I did see the figures on this, and I'm pretty sure that the median wage was £13.68.
Yes, right. So it's more than the median wage. Exactly, that's my point. Yeah. And so, I mean, I think there is a cost of living crisis going on for lots of families. Fuel, energy costs going up, rent going up in particular amongst poorer renters, the cut to universal credit, all of these things are contributing, and inflation, as has already been referred to. I think there are areas of the economy where I worry that we have tried to get, for instance, care homes to function properly on what seemed little better than slave wages. And I think in the end that cannot last. We will have to, people in those jobs, we realised in the pandemic when we had all the lockdowns that the people who you simply could not do without were often the people on the minimum wage. So I think we do have to restructure all of that. I also don't think it helps particularly if you're going to take more money off people in a new tax which the government's introduced, which is not going to, I suspect, give a single penny into the care home system at all.
OK, we're slightly running out of time again. Rachel?
Exactly, with Chris and with Christopher, both of you here, basically doubling the minimum wage is going to put businesses out of business at a time when they're already under strain and at a time when they're about to face another tax, the employer's national insurance that's coming in. But I think it is also true that this Conservative government is taking money off the poorest at a very difficult time with that national insurance increase and with the cuts to universal credit when there is a cost of living crisis that is only going to get worse this winter. So no, the Labour policy won't work in reality. However, the landscape in which the poorest are going to be very, very badly hit, and the Conservative response is to tax them more to subsidise the inheritances of the wealthy, that also looks kind of wrong to me.
And Andrew is about to explode.
Well, I don't think I've got time to properly do justice to some of the things that were just said. However, what I would say is that we are increasing the national living wage to £8.91 per hour. We have taken more of the lowest paid out of tax altogether. We've increased the number of people that can get onto the national living wage by allowing 23 and 24-year-olds to get on that. And you just have to look at the action that we've taken as a government over the past 2 years of crisis in this country. The furlough scheme, saving millions of jobs across this country, making sure that people had money in their pockets so that when we could get back to normal, they could keep their lives on track. This government understands what the British people need, and we are taking the tough action to ensure.
Come off it, Andrew. Really, come off it. Honestly.
Well, we've run out of time for our fun text question at the end, which was going to be about Halloween, but sadly,
no pumpkins.
No pumpkin. I agree with you.
It's my birthday. Can we celebrate that?
Happy birthday for
It's
Halloween.
my brother's birthday.
It's nowhere near Halloween. Why were you even having a question on Halloween?
Well, you started it.
I know. Well, no, I didn't start it. Somebody else did. Anyway, thank you very much indeed, Chris Bryant, Rachel Cunliffe, Christopher Snowdon and Andrew Barrett. Thank you very much for joining us. Coming up in a moment, we are going to spend an hour in the company of Michel Barnier, the former EU Brexit negotiator, and he's running for the French presidency at the moment. I interviewed him earlier today. It's a fascinating chat, actually. Really, I was slightly taken aback by how charming he was. I kind of didn't want him to be.
He said the same of you.
Yeah, I know he did. No, we got on very well, as you will hear over the next 60 minutes on LBC. You're listening to LBC. It's 9 o'clock.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 9 o'clock. The mother of Sarah Everard told a court she's haunted by the horror of her daughter's murder. A former police officer is being sentenced following the 33-year-old's death back in March. Wayne Couzens